After breakfast, that next morning in Chamonix, we went out in the yard and watched the gangs of excursioning tourists arriving and departing with their mules and guides and porters. Then we took a look through the telescope at the snowy hump of Mont Blanc. It was brilliant with sunshine, and the vast smooth bulge seemed hardly 500 yards away. With the naked eye, we could dimly make out the house at the Pier Pointu, which is located by the side of the Great Glacier and is more than 3,000 feet above the level of the valley, but with the telescope we could see all its details. While I looked, a woman rode by the house on a mule, and I saw her with sharp distinctness. I could have described her dress. I saw her nod to the people of the house and rein up her mule and put her hand up to shield her eyes from the sun. I was not used to telescopes. In fact, I had never looked through a good one before. It seemed incredible to me that this woman could be so far away. I was satisfied that I could see all these details with my naked eye, but when I tried it, that mule and those vivid people had wholly vanished, and the house itself was become small and vague. I tried the telescope again, and again everything was vivid. The strong black shadows of the mule and the woman were flung against the side of the house, and I saw the mule's silhouette wave its ears. The telescopulist, or the telescopulariat, I do not know which is right, said a party were making a grand ascent and would come in sight on the remote upper heights presently, so we waited to observe this performance. Presently, I had a superb idea. I wanted to stand with a party on the summit of Mont Blanc, merely to be able to say I had done it, and I believed the telescope could set me within 7 feet of the uppermost man. The telescoper assured me that it could. I then asked him how much I owed him for as far as I had got. He said, 1 franc. I asked him how much it would cost to make the entire ascent. 3 francs. I at once determined to make the entire ascent. But first I inquired if there was any danger. He said no, not by telescope. Said he had taken a great many parties to the summit and never lost a man. I asked what he would charge to let my agent go with me, together with such guides and porters as might be necessary. He said he would let Harris go for 2 francs, and that unless we were unusually timid, he should consider guides and porters unnecessary. It was not customary to take them when going by telescope, for they were rather an encumbrance than a help. He said that the party now on the mountain were approaching the most difficult part, and if we hurried, we should overtake them within 10 minutes, and could then join them and have the benefit of their guides and porters without their knowledge and without expense to us. I then said we would start immediately. I believe I said it calmly, though I was conscious of a shudder and of a paling cheek, in view of the nature of the exploit I was so unreflectingly engaged in. But the old daredevil spirit was upon me, and I said that as I had committed myself, I would not back down. I would ascend Mont Blanc if it cost me my life. I told the man to slant his machine in the proper direction and let us be off. Harris was afraid and did not want to go, but I heartened him up and said I would hold his hand all the way, so he gave his consent, though he trembled a little at first. I took a last pathetic look upon the pleasant summer scene about me, then boldly put my eye to the glass and prepared to mount among the grim glaciers and the everlasting snows. We took our way carefully and cautiously across the great Glacier des Bossons, over yawning and terrific crevices, and among imposing crags and buttresses of ice, which were fringed with icicles of gigantic proportions. The desert of ice that stretched far and wide about us was wild and desolate beyond description, and the perils which beset us were so great that at times I was minded to turn back. But I pulled my pluck together and pushed on. We passed the glacier safely and began to mount the steeps beyond, with great alacrity. When we were 7 minutes out from the starting point, we reached an altitude where the scene took a new aspect. An apparently limitless continent of gleaming snow was tilted heavenward before our faces. As my eye followed that awful acclivity far away up into the remote skies, it seemed to me that all I had ever seen before of sublimity and magnitude was small and insignificant compared to this. We rested a moment and then began to mount with speed. Within 3 minutes we caught sight of the party ahead of us and stopped to observe them. They were toiling up a long, slanting ridge of snow, 12 persons, roped together some 15 feet apart, marching in single file and strongly marked against the clear blue sky. One was a woman. We could see them lift their feet and put them down. We saw them swing their alpenstocks forward in unison, like so many pendulums, and then bear their weight upon them. We saw the lady wave her handkerchief. They dragged themselves upward in a worn and weary way, for they had been climbing steadily from the Grand Mulets, on the Glacier des Bossons, since 3 in the morning, and it was 11 now. We saw them sink down in the snow and rest, and drink something from a bottle. After a while they moved on, and as they approached the final short dash of the home stretch, we closed up on them and joined them. Presently we all stood together on the summit. What a view was spread out below. Away off under the northwestern horizon rolled the silent billows of the Farnese Oberland, their snowy crests glinting softly in the subdued lights of distance. In the north rose the giant form of the Wobblehorn, draped from peak to shoulder in sable thunder clouds. Beyond him, to the right, stretched the grand processional summits of the Cisalpine Cordillera, drowned in a sensuous haze. To the east loomed the colossal masses of the Jodelhorn, the Fuddlehorn, and the Dinnerhorn, their cloudless summits flashing white and cold in the sun. Beyond them shimmered the faint far line of the Gouts of Jubelpoor and the Aiguilles des Alleghenies. In the south towered the smoking peak of Popocatépetl and the unapproachable altitudes of the peerless Scrabblehorn. In the west-south, the stately range of the Himalayas lay dreaming in a purple gloom, and thence all around the curving horizon the eye roved over a troubled sea of sun-kissed Alps, and noted here and there the noble proportions and the soaring domes of the Bottlehorn, and the Saddlehorn, and the Shovelhorn, and the Powderhorn, all bathed in the glory of noon, and mottled with softly gliding blots, the shadows flung from drifting clouds. Overcome by the scene, we all raised a triumphant, tremendous shout in unison. A startled man at my elbow said, "Confound you, what do you yell like that for right here in the street?" That brought me down to Chamonix like a flirt. I gave that man some spiritual advice and disposed of him, and then paid the telescope man his full fee, and said that we were charmed with the trip and would remain down, and not reascend, and require him to fetch us down by telescope. This pleased him very much, for of course we could have stepped back to the summit and put him to the trouble of bringing us home if we wanted to. I judged we could get diplomas now anyhow, so we went after them, but the chief guide put us off, with one pretext or another, during all the time we stayed in Chamonix, and we ended by never getting them at all. So much for his prejudice against people's nationality. However, we worried him enough to make him remember us and our ascent for some time. He even said once that he wished there was a lunatic asylum in Chamonix. This shows that he really had fears that we were going to drive him mad. It was what we intended to do, but lack of time defeated it. I cannot venture to advise the reader one way or the other as to ascending Mont Blanc. I say only this: if he is at all timid, the enjoyments of the trip will hardly make up for the hardships and sufferings he will have to endure. But if he has good nerve, youth, health, and a bold, firm will, and could leave his family comfortably provided for in case the worst happened, he would find the ascent a wonderful experience, and the view from the top a vision to dream about and tell about, and recall with exultation all the days of his life. While I do not advise such a person to attempt the ascent, I do not advise him against it. But if he elects to attempt it, let him be warily careful of two things: choose a calm, clear day, and do not pay the telescope man in advance. There are dark stories of his getting advance payers on the summit and then leaving them there to rot. A frightful tragedy was once witnessed through the Chamonix telescopes. Think of questions and answers like these on an inquest. Coroner: you saw deceased lose his life. Witness: I did. C: where was he at the time? W: close to the summit of Mont Blanc. C: where were you? W: in the main street of Chamonix. C: what was the distance between you? W: a little over 5 miles, as the bird flies. This accident occurred in 1866, a year and a month after the disaster on the Matterhorn. 3 adventurous English gentlemen of great experience in mountain climbing made up their minds to ascend Mont Blanc without guides or porters. All endeavors to dissuade them from their project failed. Powerful telescopes are numerous in Chamonix. These huge brass tubes, mounted on their scaffoldings and pointed skyward from every choice vantage ground, have the formidable look of artillery, and give the town the general aspect of getting ready to repel a charge of angels. The reader may easily believe that the telescopes had plenty of custom on that August morning in 1866, for everybody knew of the dangerous undertaking which was on foot, and all had fears that misfortune would result. All the morning, the tubes remained directed toward the mountain heights, each with its anxious group around it, but the white deserts were vacant. At last, toward 11 o'clock, the people who were looking through the telescopes cried out, "There they are!" And sure enough, far up, on the loftiest terraces of the Grand Plateau, the three pygmies appeared, climbing with remarkable vigor and spirit. They disappeared in the corridor and were lost to sight during an hour. Then they reappeared and were presently seen standing together upon the extreme summit of Mont Blanc. So all was well. They remained a few minutes on that highest point of land in Europe, a target for all the telescopes, and were then seen to begin descent. Suddenly, all three vanished. An instant after, they appeared again, 2,000 feet below. Evidently, they had tripped and been shot down an almost perpendicular slope of ice to a point where it joined the border of the upper glacier. Naturally, the distant witness supposed they were now looking upon three corpses, so they could hardly believe their eyes when they presently saw two of the men rise to their feet and bend over the third. During 2 hours and a half, they watched the two busying themselves over the extended form of their brother, who seemed entirely inert. Chamonix's affairs stood still. Everybody was in the street. All interest was centered upon what was going on upon that lofty and isolated stage 5 miles away. Finally, the two, one of them walking with great difficulty, were seen to begin descent, abandoning the third, who was no doubt lifeless. Their movements were followed, step by step, until they reached the corridor and disappeared behind its ridge. Before they had had time to traverse the corridor and reappear, twilight was come, and the power of the telescope was at an end. The survivors had a most perilous journey before them in the gathering darkness, for they must get down to the Grands Mulets before they would find a safe stopping place, a long and tedious descent, and perilous enough even in good daylight. The oldest guides expressed the opinion that they could not succeed, that all the chances were that they would lose their lives. Yet those brave men did succeed. They reached the Grands Mulets in safety. Even the fearful shock which their nerves had sustained was not sufficient to overcome their coolness and courage. It would appear from the official account that they were threading their way down through those dangers from the closing in of twilight until 2 o'clock in the morning, or later, because the rescuing party from Chamonix reached the Grand Mulets about 3 in the morning and moved thence toward the scene of the disaster under the leadership of Sir George Young, who had only just arrived. After having been on his feet 24 hours in the exhausting work of mountain climbing, Sir George began the descent at the head of the relief party of 6 guides to recover the corpse of his brother. This was considered a new imprudence, as the number was too few for the service required. Another relief party presently arrived at the cabin on the Grands Mulets and quartered themselves there to await events. 10 hours after Sir George's departure toward the summit, this new relief was still scanning the snowy altitudes above them from their own high perch among the ice deserts 10,000 feet above the level of the sea, but the whole forenoon had passed without a glimpse of any living thing appearing up there. This was alarming. Half a dozen of their number set out, then early in the afternoon, to seek and succor Sir George and his guides. The persons remaining at the cabin saw these disappear, and then ensued another distressing wait. 4 hours passed without tidings. Then at 5 o'clock another relief, consisting of 3 guides, set forward from the cabin. They carried food and cordials for the refreshment of their predecessors. They took lanterns with them, too. Night was coming on, and to make matters worse, a fine, cold rain had begun to fall. At the same hour that these 3 began their dangerous ascent, the official guide-in-chief of the Mont Blanc region undertook the dangerous descent to Chamonix, all alone, to get reinforcements. However, a couple of hours later, at 7 p.m., the anxious solicitude came to an end, and happily, a bugle note was heard, and a cluster of black specks was distinguishable against the snows of the upper heights. The watchers counted these specks eagerly. 14, nobody was missing, An hour and a half later, they were all safe under the roof of the cabin. They had brought the corpse with them. Sir George Young tarried there but a few minutes, and then began the long and troublesome descent from the cabin to Chamonix. He probably reached there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, after having been afoot among the rocks and glaciers during 2 days and 2 nights. His endurance was equal to his daring. The cause of the unaccountable delay of Sir George and the relief parties among the heights where the disaster had happened was a thick fog, or partly that, and partly the slow and difficult work of conveying the dead body down the perilous steeps. The corpse, upon being viewed at the inquest, showed no bruises, and it was some time before the surgeons discovered that the neck was broken. One of the surviving brothers had sustained some unimportant injuries, but the other had suffered no hurt at all. How these men could fall 2,000 feet, almost perpendicularly, and live afterward is a most strange and unaccountable thing. A great many women have made the ascent of Mont Blanc. An English girl, Miss Stratton, conceived the daring idea 2 or 3 years ago of attempting the ascent in the middle of winter. She tried it, and she succeeded. Moreover, she froze 2 of her fingers on the way up. She fell in love with her guide on the summit, and she married him when she got to the bottom again. There is nothing in romance, in the way of a striking situation, which can beat this love scene in mid-heaven on an isolated ice crest with the thermometer at 0 and an Arctic gale blowing. The first woman who ascended Mont Blanc was a girl aged 22, Emile, Maria Paradis, 1809. Nobody was with her but her sweetheart, and he was not a guide. The sex then took a rest for about 30 years when a Emile d'Angeville made the ascent, 1838. In Chamonix, I picked up a rude old lithograph of that day which pictured her in the act. However, I value it less as a work of art than as a fashion plate. Miss d'Angeville put on a pair of men's pantaloons to climb it, which was wise, but she cramped their utility by adding her petticoat, which was idiotic. One of the mournfulest calamities which men's disposition to climb dangerous mountains has resulted in happened on Mont Blanc in September 1870. M. 500 Arve tells the story briefly in his Histoire du Mont Blanc. In the next chapter, I will copy its chief features. Chapter 45. A catastrophe which cost 11 lives. On the 5th of September, 1870, a caravan of 11 persons departed from Chamonix to make the ascent of Mont Blanc. 3 of the party were tourists, Messrs. Randall and Bean, Americans, and Mr. George Corkindale, a Scotch gentleman. There were 3 guides and 5 porters. The cabin on the Grands Mulets was reached that day. The ascent was resumed early the next morning, September 6th. The day was fine and clear, and the movements of the party were observed through the telescopes of Chamonix. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they were seen to reach the summit. A few minutes later, they were seen making the first steps of the descent. Then a cloud closed around them and hid them from view. 8 hours passed. The cloud still remained. Night came. No one had returned to the Grands Mulets. Sylvain Coutet, keeper of the cabin there, suspected a misfortune and sent down to the valley for help. A detachment of guides went up, but by the time they had made the tedious trip and reached the cabin, a raging storm had set in. They had to wait. Nothing could be attempted in such a tempest. The wild storm lasted more than a week, without ceasing, but on the 17th, Coutet, with several guides, left the cabin and succeeded in making the ascent. In the snowy wastes near the summit they came upon 5 bodies, lying upon their sides in a reposeful attitude which suggested that possibly they had fallen asleep there, while exhausted with fatigue and hunger and benumbed with cold, and never knew when death stole upon them. Coutet moved a few steps further and discovered 5 more bodies. The 11th corpse, that of a porter, was not found, although diligent search was made for it. In the pocket of Mr. Bean, one of the Americans, was found a notebook in which had been penciled some sentences which admit us, in flesh and spirit, as it were, to the presence of these men during their last hours of life, and to the grisly horrors which their fading vision looked upon, and their failing consciousness took cognizance of. Tuesday, Sept. 6, I have made the ascent of Mont Blanc, with 10 persons, 8 guides, and Mr. Corkindale and Mr. Randall. We reached the summit at 2:30. Immediately after quitting it, We were enveloped in clouds of snow. We passed the night in a grotto hollowed in the snow, which afforded us but poor shelter, and I was ill all night. Sept 7 morning, the cold is excessive, the snow falls heavily and without interruption, the guides take no rest. Evening, my dear Hesse, we have been 2 days on Mont Blanc, in the midst of a terrible hurricane of snow. We have lost our way, and are in a hole scooped in the snow at an altitude of 15,000 feet. I have no longer any hope of descending. They had wandered around and around in the blinding snowstorm, hopelessly lost, in a space only 100 yards square, and when cold and fatigue vanquished them at last, they scooped their cave and lay down there to die by inches, unaware that 5 steps more would have brought them into the true path. They were so near to life and safety as that, and did not suspect it. The thought of this gives the sharpest pang that the tragic story conveys. The author of the Histoire du Mont Blanc introduced the closing sentences of Mr. Bean's pathetic record thus. Here the characters are large and unsteady, the hand which traces them is become chilled and torpid, but the spirit survives, and the faith and resignation of the dying man are expressed with a sublime simplicity. Perhaps this notebook will be found and sent to you. We have nothing to eat, my feet are already frozen, and I am exhausted. I have strength to write only a few words more. I have left means for 100's education. I know you will employ them wisely. I die with faith in God and with loving thoughts of you. Farewell to all. We shall meet again in heaven. I think of you always. It is the way of the Alps to deliver death to their victims with a merciful swiftness, but here the rule failed. These men suffered the bitterest death that has been recorded in the history of those mountains, freighted as that history is with grisly tragedies. Chapter 46. Meeting a hog on a precipice. Mr. Harris and I took some guides and porters and ascended to the Hotel des Pyramids, which is perched on the high moraine which borders the Glacier des Bossons. The road led sharply uphill all the way through grass and flowers and woods, and was a pleasant walk, barring the fatigue of the climb. From the hotel we could view the huge glacier at very close range. After a rest, we followed down a path which had been made in the steep inner frontage of the moraine and stepped upon the glacier itself. One of the shows of the place was a tunnel-like cavern which had been hewn in the glacier. The proprietor of this tunnel took candles and conducted us into it. It was 3 or 4 feet wide and about 6 feet high. Its walls of pure and solid ice emitted a soft and rich blue light that produced a lovely effect and suggested enchanted caves and that sort of thing. When we had proceeded some yards and were entering darkness, we turned about and had a dainty sunlit picture of distant woods and heights framed in the strong arch of the tunnel and seen through the tender blue radiance of the tunnel's atmosphere. The cavern was nearly 100 yards long, and when we reached its inner limit, the proprietor stepped into a branch tunnel with his candles and left us buried in the bowels of the glacier and in pitch darkness. We judged his purpose was murder and robbery, so we got out our matches and prepared to sell our lives as dearly as possible by setting the glacier on fire if the worst came to the worst. But we soon perceived that this man had changed his mind. He began to sing in a deep, melodious voice and woke some curious and pleasing echoes. By and by he came back and pretended that that was what he had gone behind there for. We believed as much of that as we wanted to. Thus our lives had been once more in imminent peril, but by the exercise of the swift sagacity and cool courage which had saved us so often, we had added another escape to the long list. The tourist should visit that ice cavern by all means, for it is well worth the trouble, but I would advise him to go only with a strong and well-armed force. I do not consider artillery necessary, yet it would not be unadvisable to take it along, if convenient. The journey, going and coming, is about 3.5 miles, 3 of which are on level ground. We made it in less than a day, but I would counsel the unpracticed, if not pressed for time, to allow themselves to. Nothing is gained in the Alps by overexertion. Nothing is gained by crowding 2 days, work into one for the poor sake of being able to boast of the exploit afterward. It will be found much better, in the long run, to do the thing in 2 days, and then subtract one of them from the narrative. This saves fatigue, and does not injure the narrative. All the more thoughtful among the Alpine tourists do this. We now called upon the guide-in-chief and asked for a squadron of guides and porters for the ascent of the Montanvert. This idiot glared at us and said, "You don't need guides and porters to go to the Montanvert. What do we need then? Such as you, an ambulance." I was so stung by this brutal remark that I took my custom elsewhere. Betimes next morning, we had reached an altitude of 5,000 feet above the level of the sea. Here we camped and breakfasted. There was a cabin there, the spot is called the Calet, and a spring of ice-cold water. On the door of the cabin was a sign in French to the effect that one may here see a living chamois for 50 centimes. We did not invest. What we wanted was to see a dead one. A little after noon, we ended the ascent and arrived at the new hotel on the Montanvert, and had a view of 6 miles right up the great glacier, the famous Mer de Glace. At this point, it is like a sea whose deep swales and long, rolling swells have been caught in mid-movement and frozen solid, but further up, it is broken up into wildly tossing billows of ice. We descended a ticklish path in the steep side of the moraine and invaded the glacier. There were tourists of both sexes scattered far and wide over it, everywhere, and it had the festive look of a skating rink. The Empress Josephine came this far once. She ascended the Montanvert in 1810, but not alone. A small army of men preceded her to clear the path and carpet it, perhaps, and she followed under the protection of 68 guides. Her successor visited Chamonix later, but in far different style. It was 7 weeks after the first fall of the empire, and poor Marie-Louise, ex-empress, was a fugitive. She came at night, and in a storm with only 2 attendants, and stood before a peasant's hut, tired, bedraggled, soaked with rain, the red print of her lost crown still girdling her brow, and implored admittance, and was refused. A few days before, the adulations and applauses of a nation were sounding in her ears, and now she was come to this. We crossed the Mer de Glace in safety, but we had misgivings. The crevices in the ice yawned deep and blue and mysterious, and it made one nervous to traverse them. The huge round waves of ice were slippery and difficult to climb, and the chances of tripping and sliding down them and darting into a crevice were too many to be comfortable. In the bottom of a deep swale between 2 of the biggest of the ice waves, we found a fraud who pretended to be cutting steps to ensure the safety of tourists. He was soldiering when we came upon him, but he hopped up and chipped out a couple of steps, about big enough for a cat, and charged us a franc or 2 for it. Then he sat down again to doze till the next party should come along. He had collected blackmail from 200 or 300 people already that day, but had not chipped out ice enough to impair the glacier perceptibly. I have heard of a good many soft sinecures, but it seems to me that keeping toll bridge on a glacier is the softest one I have encountered yet. That was a blazing hot day, and it brought a persistent and persecuting thirst with it. What an unspeakable luxury it was to slake that thirst with the pure and limpid ice water of the glacier. Down the sides of every great rib of pure ice poured limpid rills in gutters carved by their own attrition. Better still, wherever a rock had lain, there was now a bowl-shaped hole, with smooth white sides and bottom of ice, and this bowl was brimming with water of such absolute clearness that the careless observer would not see it at all, but would think the bowl was empty. These fountains had such an alluring look that I often stretched myself out when I was not thirsty and dipped my face in and drank till my teeth ached. Everywhere among the Swiss mountains we had at hand the blessing, not to be found in Europe, except in the mountains, of water capable of quenching thirst. Everywhere in the Swiss highlands brilliant little rills of exquisitely cold water went dancing along by the roadsides, and my comrade and I were always drinking and always delivering our deep gratitude. But in Europe everywhere except in the mountains, the water is flat and insipid beyond the power of words to describe. It is served lukewarm, but no matter, ice could not help it. It is incurably flat, incurably insipid. It is only good to wash with. I wonder it doesn't occur to the average inhabitant to try it for that. In Europe the people say contemptuously, nobody drinks water here. Indeed, they have a sound and sufficient reason. In many places they even have what may be called prohibitory reasons. In Paris and Munich, for instance, they say, don't drink the water, it is simply poison. Either America is healthier than Europe, notwithstanding her deadly indulgence in ice water, or she does not keep the run of her death rate as sharply as Europe does. I think we do keep up the death statistics accurately, and if we do, our cities are healthier than the cities of Europe. Every month, the German government tabulates the death rate of the world and publishes it. I scrapbooked these reports during several months, and it was curious to see how regular and persistently each city repeated its same death rate month after month. The tables might as well have been stereotyped. They varied so little. These tables were based upon weekly reports showing the average of deaths in each 1,000 population for a year. Munich was always present with her 33 deaths in each 1,000 of her population, yearly average. Chicago was as constant with her 15 or 17, Dublin with her 48, and so on. Only a few American cities appear in these tables, but they are scattered so widely over the country that they furnish a good general average of city health in the United States. And I think it will be granted that our towns and villages are healthier than our cities. Here is the average of the only American cities reported in the German tables. Chicago, deaths in 1,000 population annually 16, Philadelphia 18, St. Louis 18, San Francisco 19, New York, the Dublin of America 23. See how the figures jump up as soon as one arrives at the transatlantic list. Paris 27, Glasgow 27, London 28, Vienna 28, Augsburg 28, Braunschweig 28, Königsberg 29, Cologne 29, Dresden 29, Hamburg 29, Berlin 30, Bombay 30, Warsaw 31, Breslau 31, Odessa 32, Munich 33, Strasbourg 33, Pest 35, Kassel 35, Lisbon 36, Liverpool 36, Prague 37, Madras 37, Bucharest 39, St. Petersburg 40, Trieste 40, Alexandria, Egypt 43, Dublin 48, Calcutta 55. Edinburgh is as healthy as New York 23, but there is no city in the entire list which is healthier, except Frankfurt on the Main 20. But Frankfurt is not as healthy as Chicago, San Francisco, St. Louis, or Philadelphia. Perhaps a strict average of the world might develop the fact that where 1 in 1,000 of America's population dies, 2 in 1,000 of the other populations of the earth succumb. I do not like to make insinuations, but I do think the above statistics darkly suggest that these people over here drink this detestable water on the sly. We climbed the moraine on the opposite side of the glacier, and then crept along its sharp ridge 100 yards or so, in pretty constant danger of a tumble to the glacier below. The fall would have been only 100 feet, but it would have closed me out as effectually as 1,000. Therefore I respected the distance accordingly and was glad when the trip was done. A moraine is an ugly thing to assault head first. At a distance, it looks like an endless grave of fine sand, accurately shaped and nicely smoothed, but close by, it is found to be made mainly of rough boulders of all sizes, from that of a man's head to that of a cottage. By and by we came to the mauvaise pas, or the villainous road, to translate it feelingly. It was a breakneck path around the face of a precipice 40 or 50 feet high, and nothing to hang on to but some iron railings. I got along slowly, safely, and uncomfortably, and finally reached the middle. My hopes began to rise a little, but they were quickly blighted, for there I met a hog, a long-nosed, bristly fellow that held up his snout and worked his nostrils at me inquiringly. A hog on a pleasure excursion in Switzerland, think of it. It is striking and unusual. A body might write a poem about it. He could not retreat if he had been disposed to do it. It would have been foolish to stand upon our dignity in a place where there was hardly room to stand upon our feet, so we did nothing of the sort. There were 20 or 30 ladies and gentlemen behind us. We all turned about and went back, and the hog followed behind. The creature did not seem set up by what he had done. He had probably done it before. We reached the restaurant on the height called the Chapeau at 4 in the afternoon. It was a memento factory, and the stock was large, cheap, and varied. I bought the usual paper cutter to remember the place by, and had Mont Blanc, the Mauvaise Pas, and the rest of the region branded on my alpenstock. Then we descended to the valley and walked home without being tied together. This was not dangerous, for the valley was 5 miles wide and quite level. We reached the hotel before 9 o'clock. Next morning we left for Geneva on top of the diligence, under shelter of a gay awning. If I remember rightly, there were more than 20 people up there. It was so high that the ascent was made by ladder. The huge vehicle was full everywhere, inside and out. 5 other diligences left at the same time, all full. We had engaged our seats 2 days beforehand to make sure and paid the regulation price, $5 each. But the rest of the company were wiser. They had trusted Baedeker and waited. Consequently, some of them got their seats for $1 or $2. Baedeker knows all about hotels, railway and diligence companies and speaks his mind freely. He is a trustworthy friend of the traveler. We never saw Mont Blanc at his best until we were many miles away. Then he lifted his majestic proportions high into the heavens, all white and cold and solemn, and made the rest of the world seem little and plebeian and cheap and trivial. As he passed out of sight at last, an old Englishman settled himself in his seat and said, "Well, I am satisfied. I have seen the principal features of Swiss scenery, Mont Blanc and the Goiter, now for home." Chapter 47. Queer European Manners. We spent a few pleasant, restful days at Geneva, that delightful city where accurate timepieces are made for all the rest of the world, but whose own clocks never give the correct time of day by any accident. Geneva is filled with pretty shops, and the shops are filled with the most enticing gimcrackery, but if one enters one of these places, he is at once pounced upon and followed up, and so persecuted to buy this, that, and the other thing, that he is very grateful to get out again, and is not at all apt to repeat his experiment. The shopkeepers of the smaller sort in Geneva are as troublesome and persistent as are the salesmen of that monster hive in Paris, the Grands Magasins du Louvre, an establishment where ill-mannered pestering, pursuing, and insistence have been reduced to a science. In Geneva, prices in the smaller shops are very elastic. That is another bad feature. I was looking in at a window at a very pretty string of beads, suitable for a child. I was only admiring them. I had no use for them. I hardly ever wear beads. The shopwoman came out and offered them to me for 35 francs. I said it was cheap, but I did not need them. "Ah, but monsieur, they are so beautiful." I confessed it, but said they were not suitable for one of my age and simplicity of character. She darted in and brought them out and tried to force them into my hands, saying, "Ah, but only see how lovely they are. Surely monsieur will take them. Monsieur shall have them for 30 francs. There, I have said it. It is a loss, but one must live." I dropped my hands and tried to move her to respect my unprotected situation. But no, she dangled the beads in the sun before my face, exclaiming, "Ah, monsieur cannot resist them." She hung them on my coat button, folded her hand resignedly, and said, "Gone, and for 30 francs, the lovely things. It is incredible, but the good God will sanctify the sacrifice to me." I removed them gently, returned them, and walked away, shaking my head and smiling a smile of silly embarrassment while the passers-by halted to observe. The woman leaned out of her door, shook the beads, and screamed after me, "Monsieur shall have them for 28. I shook my head. 27, it is a cruel loss, it is ruin, but take them, only take them. I still retreated, still wagging my head. Mon Dieu, they shall even go for 26. There, I have said it, come. I wagged another negative. A nurse and a little English girl had been near me and were following me now. The shopwoman ran to the nurse, thrust the beads into her hands, and said, "Monsieur shall have them for 25. Take them to the hotel. He shall send me the money tomorrow, next day when he likes." Then to the child, "When thy father sends me the money, come thou also, my angel, and thou shalt have something oh so pretty." I was thus providentially saved. The nurse refused the beads squarely and firmly, and that ended the matter. Sights of Geneva are not numerous. I made one attempt to hunt up the houses once inhabited by those two disagreeable people, Rousseau and Calvin, but I had no success. Then I concluded to go home. I found it was easier to propose to do that than to do it, for that town is a bewildering place. I got lost in a tangle of narrow and crooked streets, and stayed lost for an hour or two. Finally, I found a street which looked somewhat familiar and said to myself, "Now I am at home, I judge." But I was wrong. This was Hell Street. Presently, I found another place which had a familiar look and said to myself, "Now I am at home, sure." It was another error. This was Purgatory Street. After a little I said, "Now I've got the right place anyway. No, this is Paradise Street. I'm further from home than I was in the beginning." Those were queer names. Calvin was the author of them, likely. Hell and Purgatory fitted those two streets like a glove, but the Paradise appeared to be sarcastic. I came out on the lake front, at last, and then I knew where I was. I was walking along before the glittering jewelry shops when I saw a curious performance. A lady passed by, and a trim dandy lounged across the walk in such an apparently carefully timed way as to bring himself exactly in front of her when she got to him. He made no offer to step out of the way. He did not apologize. He did not even notice her. She had to stop still and let him lounge by. I wondered if he had done that piece of brutality purposely. He strolled to a chair and seated himself at a small table. 2 or 3 other males were sitting at similar tables, sipping sweetened water. I waited. Presently a youth came by, and this fellow got up and served him the same trick. Still, it did not seem possible that anyone could do such a thing deliberately. To satisfy my curiosity, I went around the block, and sure enough, as I approached, at a good round speed, he got up and lounged lazily across my path, fouling my course exactly at the right moment to receive all my weight. This proved that his previous performances had not been accidental, but intentional. I saw that dandy's curious game played afterward in Paris, but not for amusement, not with a motive of any sort, indeed, but simply from a selfish indifference to other people's comfort and rights. One does not see it as frequently in Paris as he might expect to, for there the law says, in effect, it is the business of the weak to get out of the way of the strong. We fine a cabman if he runs over a citizen. Paris fines the citizen for being run over. At least so everybody says, but I saw something which caused me to doubt. I saw a horseman run over an old woman one day. The police arrested him and took him away. That looked as if they meant to punish him.